Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am Jordan and I'm so excited because today I'm here to bring you guys back a favorite from last year, which was my best in books, this time of 2019. I'm so excited to bring you guys these books. If you're into books like me, or even if you're not, a lot of times you'll see like 50 Shades of Beige on these lists. And no, we're going to be doing my favorite books of 2019, and they're all by Black writers. Last year, you guys loved it so much, I wanted to bring it back to you guys. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and dive into that list. As you can tell, my setup's a little different. I am actually traveling. In 2020, I just hope it's amazing, an amazing reading year. And I hope that you guys, if you haven't checked out some of the books that I mentioned on this list, that you guys will go ahead and give them a read because they were my favorite. I read over 60 books this year. So you know it was really hard to narrow it down, but I wanted to bring you my top favorites, and this is what this list is. So the first two books that I'm talking about, I will not say a ranking for them. These are my top. This is number 10. With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. You guys know, if you followed my channel, that I loved The Poet X, which was the author's debut and was actually my favorite book of 2018. So I knew I was going to be reading this, but I didn't realize I was going to fall in love with this book. This book is nothing like The Poet X. The Poet X was told in completely in verse, and if you haven't read it, definitely read it. But this book follows Imani, who is a teen mother who loves cooking. Reading a book about a young person who loves cooking and who is on that trajectory in their career was so refreshing for me. Additionally, the character is Puerto Rican and African American, and discussing that, also discussing the topic of race and how, she is Black on both sides. And it's just an engaging read for that alone. But then you tie in the fact that we're following a teen mother. That is a story that I've never read. I honestly have not read one of a teen mother who now we're following her life once the baby is here. This isn't about a teen pregnancy. This is, I've had the baby, I'm raising this child, I am still in high school, and this is my life. And I thought that was beautifully done and will also be a great story for other kids to read. It shows a supportive system from her abuela, her grandmother, to her friends, to her advisor in school, some of the adults who are pushing her and who are encouraging her to go after her dreams and her passions. You know, there's a culinary arts program that is introduced in the school, and we're following her struggle of, one, should she take this, should she try this program out, knowing the responsibilities that she has as a teen mother. This was a book I loved so much. You guys know I'm a huge proponent of the library, but I not only purchased this book in physical print to own, but I also listened to this on audio after I finished reading it via the library. I listened to it on audio. It is narrated by the author beautifully, like beautifully. I have a hard time figuring out which I enjoyed better, actually physically reading it or listening to it. I say you can't go wrong with either. Definitely read this, pick this up if you haven't. Coming in at number 10, again, tied at number 10, is Heavy by Keith Lehman. This is a memoir. This is one that I listened to on audio, and I recommend listening to it on audio as well, especially if you like audiobooks. This is also narrated by the author, which for memoirs, I feel gives it a very personal touch. The memoir, though, really fits with the title Heavy. This is a heavy story. Although this is Keith's life, this surrounds his struggle with addiction as well as a semi-toxic and abusive relationship that he has with his mother. This discussed so many different topics of what it's like to be physically heavy, to be a physically heavy Black person, and to be a man in America, a Black man in America. And it touches on so many different aspects on being taught to lie, on little things that, you know, that are ingrained in you as a child, and how those wounds or those lessons are things that you carry with you throughout adulthood, and how a lot of times, you know, things are just not talked about, and that kind of festers within you to create a heaviness, essentially. This book was one that just touched me so deeply, and I cannot imagine somebody who listens or reads this who cannot connect with this in one way or another, even if it's not your story. It does all of this but it does it in such a candid way where at some points it's almost uncomfortable, because it's like, when have I ever been this honest? And it challenges you to really, really reflect on your life and to really, truly look at your life and all the pieces and all of the shame that you carry, and to kind of peel those layers back. It's almost healing reading his story or listening to his story. And what I really appreciated even more so was his mother. After I finished this, I read the letter that she wrote to Keith. And it's very interesting to think of, when you have your truth, you have all these characters, real people that are in your life, who are all experiencing this life at the same time, but in a different way, in a different perspective. And to acknowledge or to recognize the impact that either your traumas have had on their life or vice versa is just very interesting. This was a book that I definitely think would be hard for someone to not connect to or to appreciate. Coming in at number 9 is The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus. This book, you already see the cheese on my face, so you already know that this book brought me immense joy and just love. This book is follows two young girls, one in Minneapolis, one in Trinidad, both of them who have their own struggles that they're facing, their own hardships. But somehow their worlds collide, which we get to find and follow that journey, and it is beautiful. It shows the healing power of love and support, and it is just amazing. It ties in astrology and Whitney Houston references and all this Black girl beauty, joy, love, pureness, and support. All of that in one book. It just makes you feel like you are in a comfortable, loving embrace while you're reading this. That's what it feels like. It feels like you're in a loving embrace while you're reading this. I have a standalone review about how much I loved this book and how much this book was just something that it was beautiful. I can't believe that teenage girls or young people are able to read these books or have these books readily available to them. This actually is a book that is within my library. That in itself shows how far that we have come, but how far we have yet to go, because I want books like this accessible to everyone. But I am rambling, but that book was just ethereal. It was beautiful and magnificent and amazing. So definitely read that one. If you haven't, read it. Coming in at number 8 is Just Mercy. This was released actually in 2014, but I just read the book this year. This book was amazing. This is nonfiction. This is essentially Bryan Stevenson's memoir. He is the lawyer who has represented tons and tons of individuals who have been on death row, many who have been found innocent after the fact. Some who unfortunately actually, were murdered via, well, I call it murder, but via, the death penalty. Bryan Stevenson, the story follows what it's like for him as a lawyer representing these marginalized individuals, as well as he really advocates for teens and children who actually are on death row and all of the things that he has accomplished. I've seen TED Talks. Last year I read The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton, which he was represented by Bryan Stevenson. And that is essentially what made me want to read this book. This was even better than The Sun Does Shine to me. Like, this touched on so many different aspects from so many different perspectives to represent someone who's on death row, the different cases that he has followed, why he got into law, his upbringing, what it's like for him as a Black man, what it's like for him as a Black man who's a lawyer, and, the prejudice that he receives as well. So it was very interesting. It was a very good case against, the death penalty, in my opinion, as well as I'm just like, man, it inspires me to really want to do something impactful, like with my life. Granted, that is his calling, but it really makes you wonder, like, what exactly is your impact and what are you doing to impact the lives of others? Because that in return also impacts your life. But I'm getting on a whole blurb. Clearly, I love this book. I also see that Just Mercy, the title, is actually being turned into a film, but that is actually following The Sun Does Shine, Anthony Ray Hinton's story, but Bryan Stevenson is represented in that movie. I don't know how that movie will come out, but I definitely recommend the book. I say read that book. Read it, recommend it. It was really, really, really good. Yeah. Coming in at number 7 is The AI Who Loved Me by Alyssa Cole. You guys know I love Alyssa Cole. I got on that Alyssa Cole bandwagon this year. At January, I started off my year right with Alyssa Cole, and I'm so glad. If you haven't read her books, read her books, especially the Reluctant Royal series. Love that. A Princess in Theory was my first book by the author, and honestly, if I had a top 15, that would be in it. Anyways, this is about the AI who loved me. This book is everything that I have wanted in a book. It is a book of science fiction and romance. Like, how can a book be so perfect? And it's hilarious. Like, the book is so comical. This was released exclusively on audio via Audible. But the author did say that one is coming in print, or at least via ebook, so look out for that. But I actually recommend the audiobook because the audiobook was perfection. It is narrated by Regina Hall, who is hilarious in her own right. And the story is just so good, and it's so funny, and you're just there. And I listened to this twice because I love the book that much. And when it comes out on ebook, I will read it. I'm not even saying anything about the book, but the book is literally about a lady or a woman who falls in love with an AI, an artificial intelligence. And it's science fiction in the fact that, you know, there's artificial intelligence. There's a lot of different technological advances that are within the setting or within the society, and there's romance, and it's awesome. And have you guys ever this is a tangent, but if you guys ever watched the movie Her, this is Her, but 10 times better and not as creepy. Even though I didn't really think Her was creepy, but don't tell nobody that. But I loved the story, and I mean, it had me cheesing from ear to ear. And that's what books are about. That is exactly, when you're looking at the books that I love, either it's a book that deeply impacted me, deeply moved me, touched on my heart, or one that just brought me immense joy. And that's what this did. This was everything that I want in entertainment and in books. And I loved it. Coming in at number 6 is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I absolutely love this book. This book was historical fiction, where I just talked about a book that brought me immense joy. This one was heart-wrenching, like heartbreaking. It is historical fiction. It's based on a true reform school in Florida, and it follows 2 young boys who were within that reform school and the atrocities that they faced. It was a segregated reform school, and all of the abuse and torment, and also just the unfortunate events that led to these boys being within this reform school literally broke my little heart apart. But the writing was done in such a way where you are really getting to know these individual characters. In the way the book starts out, you have no idea where this book is going, and by the end of the book, Colson Whitehead literally took you on a crazy journey, but told the stories of many by telling the stories of these 2 boys. It was a book that just deeply impacted me and deeply touched me and had me thinking. I still think about those boys. Like, I still think about them. Like, it's something that was imprinted on my heart, and I don't think will leave. This is one that I love so much. I not only did a standalone review, this was one that Dwayne actually read as well, and we did a podcast discussion about. So definitely check those out if you have read it or if you're still on the fence. I am now in my top five. This next book is probably the book that brought me the most joy, period, this year. Like, all around joy. This is The Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. This was another debut. I actually didn't hear that much about this book, and I was very upset. But, you know, this is one of those where I loved this story so much. I thought it was so beautiful. It may not be for everybody, but I felt so much joy. I I talked about this, but I couldn't put this book down, and I literally finished it on a plane, and I air clapped when I was done. Like, that's how much beauty that this book brought me. This is another one that after I rented it from the library, I had to purchase to own because I just love the story that much. The Opposite of Always follows a young black boy, a young teen boy who essentially can time travel. That's really the gist of it. He's able to time travel, and he's time traveling to try to save this girl's life who he just met. And it is one of the cutest, quirkiest things. And what I loved about this book is, I said this in my review, but a lot of times when we're having these stories about these young black boys, these young black girls, it's surrounding some type of trauma. This book didn't have trauma. There wasn't that trauma as the arc type of feel to it. It was literally like black boy joy with time traveling, a little romance. And yes, there were real topics that were touched in it, but the essence of this was showing a supportive family, supportive, loving friends, and this black boy who's awkward and nerdy and who is thriving. I don't even know if he's nerdy. I'm probably trying to make him me, but that's Jack, I felt, was me. So that's probably why I love this book so much. He was just so cute, and I loved it. I loved that book. You can tell by the smile on my face, just thinking about the book is bringing me joy. So I definitely recommend it, and think you should read it as well. Coming in at number 4 is Everything Inside by Edwidge Duntikat. This was a collection of short stories. Edwidge Duntikat, if you are not familiar with her work, she has written so much, but one of my favorite, actually my favorite that she has ever written was Crick Crack, which was a collection of short stories. So when this book was coming out, I said, okay, I'm going to definitely read this and pick this up at the library. And the short stories, this was almost as good as Crick Crack. It's hard for me. I would have to give both of them a reread to figure out which one was better. That's how amazing Everything Inside was for me. This is another one where I'm like, why are people not talking about this? These short stories, of course, I had my favorites, but they were just very nuanced, very, very nuanced. The characters were not necessarily good or bad. There were some interesting stories. Some of the stories I still am thinking about. There's like one story, well, no, this will become a standalone review, which I won't do it, but it tells the stories of people who are, whether it's from the perspective of someone who is Haitian, someone who is Haitian American, someone who is from another Caribbean island, and some of the different relationships that they have, whether they are divorced, whether they were someone who was seeing was a relationship that is taboo, and whether it was a situation where this is an illegal immigrant story, and all of the stories like warp you into that life. Like, I'll just tell you, one of my favorites was actually towards the end of the book, and it was actually about someone who essentially came over on a boat and lost everything, and they meet a woman who comes out, who every day she tries to like save somebody there, and it's just an interesting story. Yeah, it's hard to say, but short stories are so amazing when the individual stories could have stood alone and been an entire novel on their own. And that's what I feel like Edwidge Duntikat does amazingly. Like, each of these stories, I believe there's like 8 or 10 of them, all of them could stand as their own individual book, and you are invested in those characters. Amazing. Coming in at number 3 is Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. This is one that was not released this year, but was one that I finally got to this year. This is her memoir. This book is probably Jesmyn Ward's best work, in my opinion, and that's my favorite writer, so that means a lot. The way Jesmyn Ward was able to tie her memoir, her story, and it's her memoir, but it's really about the lives of 5 young men who are close to her, who all passed in a relatively short time of one another. And it's basically about their lives and how the systematic issues and systematic situations of living in the rural South, living in poverty, being Black in America, impacted their lives and essentially in some ways caused their death. And It touches on mental health. It touches on poverty. It clearly touches on racism. It touches on racism in a systemic way, which I greatly appreciate. But more than that, it touches on the beauty of these individuals' lives, like the beauty of their lives, their community, and what that community means to her. And also, essentially, her love-hate relationship with the real South because of it. I have never really read a book or a memoir that touched on it in such a way, but she does an amazing job. And in the back of the book, it also deep dives into a lot of the facts behind some of just the larger, grander systemic issues. So I thought that was amazingly done. Definitely do not put this off. Read it. Coming in at number 2 is Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This is a science fiction book. It's labeled as science fiction, but it's also labeled as short stories, and some may classify it as dystopian. It's really hard to classify this book. I have not read anything like this book ever, but it was amazing. This is another one where I'm like, why are people not talking about this? This came out in the end of last year. I read it at the beginning of this year, and I had to do a whole podcast episode discussing and breaking this book down. Full disclosure, the first story is very hard. It is hard and it's graphic, and it might be trigger warning for that. There is violence and a lot of sensitive topics that are discussed. But throughout the book touches on so much, from consumerism to the school system to just everyday life to, code switching, to so many different things, all in this one book. And some of the stories are like dark comedy. It's very hard to quantify. The only thing that I can think of, which I have said before, is Black Mirror's, the TV show. If that was turned into a book in a deeper dive and even more nuanced and more creative. But if you like Black Mirror's, the show, you would love this book. Love this book. I really want people reading it because I want other people to talk about it and to figure out what is the creative juices that must flow into an author's head to create these stories. It was impeccable. Coming in at number 1 for my favorite book, the best book that I read in 2019. We might as well say in the entire decade, because this book was actually released in 2010 and it is just that good. This is The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. This is actually one that I have the physical copy here because my grandparents had it. So that's awesome. But I actually purchased to own this in physical copy after reading at the library, as well as I purchased via audiobook. That's how much I believe in this book. This book is about the Great Migration. This is American history. This is chronicling the decades that African Americans had to flee the South and move to the North, to the West, to the Midwest because of persecutions, because of economic disadvantages, because of so many different things where it made living in the South a threat to their very being. And this doesn't mean that they were fleeing to an amazing paradise or anything of that nature, but this tells the story, and this tells it the way this reads, because it's following 3 different individuals. Even though this is nonfiction, it tackles this in a way that reads like fiction. It is narrative nonfiction. It is a thick book. It is one that I really regret not picking up sooner. The reason why I didn't read it was because it intimidated me by the sheer size of the book. But when you're reading it, you not breeze through it like that, but it reads very easily. The author did an amazing job of capturing the story of America through the eyes of these 3 individuals, but also several different individuals throughout, and also giving a lot of historical facts throughout the book to further explain and back up the modern makeup of what America looks like now, and basically what that is stemmed from. This touches on Florida, from New Orleans. It touches in Georgia. It touches so many different levels, Chicago, New York, California. It shows that migration, and it shows the reasons behind that. And it tells the story of America, essentially, history that we do not get in school, unfortunately, which I find flabbergasting. But this book covers it all, and it does it in a beautiful way. And it debunks so many myths that have been fed to the masses on the structure of America, and also the facts behind certain things surrounding the Black race in general. This is an American history textbook. This is something that every American should read and should know about. This was my favorite book because it was one of the most beautifully written books, as well as it was one of the most impactful and historically sound books. I love this, and when I wasn't kidding when I said this was probably my best book of the entire decade, I meant it, not just of this year. I feel like this is a must read for everybody. Definitely, if you haven't read this, give this one a read, or definitely give this one a listen. I had the privilege of listening to this on audiobook, and I would say that is an amazing way to consume this book. An amazing way. So that was my top 10 of 2019. I hope you guys had an amazing year of reading as well. And if you guys have not checked out any of these books, please consider giving them a read. And if you have read any of these books, please, let's have a conversation. Let's talk below about some of these books and what you loved about them. And let's keep this kind of like a community flow. Also, if there's something that didn't make my top 10 that you're surprised about, or maybe something that you loved top 10 wise, or one of your favorite books, it doesn't have to be top 10. Let's talk about it below. I would love to keep this conversation going. I look forward to reading many, many more books and discussing them with you all. And I just hope you guys have an amazing 2020. Love and light, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.